Hello and welcome back to the Motogp Xtra podcast. Joining me today as always is Rhys for this pre-season special. Now, we are rapidly approaching the start of the MotoGP season. We already are in February, which for me is one of the best times of the year. We get to go to Sepang for the pre-season test. Now, for me, it's one of the most exciting parts of the season. Seeing the new bikes roll out for the first time, seeing the actual bikes that they'll be riding and not the ones they show off in their livery launches and these kind of fake 22/23 bikes. So we have a lot to cover, so we're going to jump straight in. We're going to go alphabetically through each manufacturer, talking of their teams, a bit about the riders, a bit about their improvements, where they're lacking, where they have improved, and just some feedback from the riders. So first up on the agenda today, Rhys, is Aprilia. What have you made so far of their opening couple of days in Sepang, and how do you think they're faring so far after their winter's developments?
Well, it reminds me very much of last year. The last Sepang test, they were really fast there. They were sort of topping the sessions. They weren't quite as fast this time. They weren't topping the sessions overall in the combined times or anything. But they did look very fast, which is very good because, of course, if you remember back to Malaysia when they actually raced at the end of 2022, they struggled quite a lot. So I'm hoping that, just to see another manufacturer up there consistently, I'm hoping that they've got over that slump and they've improved, and that's kind of the vibe I am getting. Aleix was saying that he was worried about the Ducati, which obviously I think everybody is, because we'll get onto them later, but they were absolutely insane. So even with their developments, it seems like the Aprilia still isn't quite a match for the Ducati, but I think he still seemed quite happy with the improvements that have been made. And Vinales, it was pre-season testing, so he was always going to be relatively happy and relatively fast. So it does seem like they've had a pretty positive test overall. And I suppose we talk about RNF quickly as well. Those guys, they both seem pretty happy, especially Ralph Fernandez, saying that it was like the first time he's been happy since 21, so since he was on the Moto2 bike. And Oliveira was looking pretty fast as well. So I think Aprilia have a pretty good pre-season overall, but yeah, still not quite as good as Ducati, I'm afraid.
Yeah, it's interesting you touch on the RNF boys. I saw a very interesting article from Rod Fernandez, and the headline quote, and I did read into it to see if it was a bit more than just a quote, and he was saying that he wanted to stay with KTM, but fate brought him to Aprilia. Now, if anyone has watched the sport in the last 18 months, he never wanted to be on that bike in any shape or form. So these statements coming out now are a bit weird. He's a bit weird character sometimes in the media. He sometimes said things that really don't add up, and this is another one. But he does look like he's already doing better on that Aprilia. And of course, his much senior teammate Miguel Oliveira has talked about Aprilia being a very precise machine. Now, is that coming from the KTM? It's just such a different machine, or is it overall the Aprilia is a kind of a knife through butter, really fine corner speed machine? So it's going to be interesting to see two new riders and also four Aprilias on the grid for the first time, probably in their history at this rate. So overall, I think it's a very good test. Like you mentioned, pretty much all your points were very accurate to the point that last year, in pre-season testing before last season, they were rapid in Sepang, and then got to the race weekend and they could have so many issues that just didn't appear anywhere in testing last year. So it just shows they're kind of not at the level as a factory yet. Now, because they're such a small factory and they're kind of only getting to the table now of kind of being competitors in the championship, it might take them a couple of years to get this nailed down, but it does look with the new bike that they have made a step forward, and both factory riders and both riders that have been on the bike for a couple of years now are having good feedback. The one thing Aleix said about the bike improvement on Maverick being a pre-season warrior, kind of didn't really have any individual inputs on the bike having any negative issues. He was just kind of praising it for giving him a bit more rear grip, something that every rider will always want more of. From Aleix's debriefs, braking, he feels like against the Ducati stopped the bike with the front and rear wheels kind of in harmony, and he said he's losing time in braking and low end torque, so out of the corner. But he says everywhere else the bike seems more slim underneath him. He had big issues last year with temperature of the bike, so he said there's a couple of races, he mentioned the Thai Grand Prix and also Sepang, where temperature soar, that he actually was burned from the bike throughout the race. So he said overall everything is improved, but they still need a small bit in braking and the kind of low end torque, which is the main thing. But you must say, really, from going from where they were 5 years ago to where they are now, I really never thought Aprilia would be at this level. But it is promising, and again, Aprilia, I actually do enjoy seeing them at the front. But we are going to move now from the other Italian manufacturer of Ducati. Rhys, Ducati on top of the world. A lot of people would say sometimes you get such an advantage that you can nearly go backwards. You can nearly mention Honda in the 800 era, where they had such an advantage and still got it wrong. It doesn't look like that for Ducati. They look like they're putting one step after the other, and they're building a serious competitive machine for 2023.
It certainly seems that way. So if you're not on the Ducati, you're definitely going to be wishing that you were anyway, especially with the times they've been showing. But honestly, they've probably had the best bike for quite a while now. I just think they finally put it all together last year. Like, I would say probably since 2018, they've had a good bike, like sort of the best bike. And I'd say probably 2020 obviously was a weird season, a bit of a dip for them. But since 2021, I would say they've had the best bike by quite a margin. So not a massive surprise. Obviously, Gigi Dall'Igna, whatever he gets paid, it's not enough, definitely. I mean, absolutely dominant. But they just look so good. So if we start with the factory Ducati, they've not made the mistakes they made last year. Obviously, one of the biggest mistakes they did was they were testing new parts too much, too late. And it actually messed Bagnaio's season up. I mean, it almost cost him the championship ultimately, because his start to the season was absolutely abysmal. Now, of course, he was so dominant at the end, it didn't actually matter. He managed to overcome the gap that he lost. But imagine it was, Fabio picked up a few more points, or, it was like a satellite Ducati. Maybe if Bastianini had won consistently from the start of the season, then it would have been difficult to overhaul. So they definitely don't want to do that again. So they've definitely improved on that. I think the only thing I could see, there was like one issue that Bagnaia had about sort of the power delivery, and apparently they fixed that within sort of like the last hour anyway of the test. So the factory team, they seem pretty happy. Both riders seeming quite fast. I think Bastianini struggled a little more than Bagnaia, but again, I guess he's still trying to get used to the team, and the bike is still going to be a bit different to what he was riding last year. I mean, he had a bit of a Frankenstein bike by the end of it. It was sort of the 21 with the 22 aero on it and stuff. So probably is quite a bit of a step now, because I mean the 21 was effectively the 20 really as well. So it probably a bit of a step for him onto this new bike. But overall, he does seem to be going quite well. Martin seems pretty happy. Obviously, he had both Pramac riders had the different engine last year to the factory guys. This year, obviously, that's not the case. So I think Martin is pretty happy with that, because that was probably, for him, I don't know whether actually, technically, that would have been that much of a difference, but at least psychologically, definitely affected him last year, having that different engine to Bagnaia and Miller. So he'll be much happier to have the same spec. And Zarco, really, he kind of just doing his job that he's hired for. He's kind of like a test rider almost, isn't he, at this point for Ducati? Kind of like the role Miller used to have in Pramac. He just tests all the components. So he was quite far actually down on the timing. He was 16th in the end, like nearly a second off Marini, who topped the component. But I don't believe he got an actual time trial run in, so that's why he's not gone for a proper qualifying run. The VR46 guys, obviously, like I just said, Marini was top, so that's pretty good for them. And Bezzecchi also topped day one, I believe, if I'm not mistaken. So both of them absolutely rapid. Watch out, it could be a Grassini-style season from last year, because they're on the last year's bike. Marini especially, this could be a bit of a Morbidelli 2020 season for him, because he's on the same bike he was on last year, all the settings dialed in. So, VR46 could, spring something quite special. And then Grassini, I couldn't really find a massive amount about these guys, to be fair, but Alex is looking great off the Alex Marquez, of course, off the Honda. Finally sort of got those shackles off, beating his brother. He looks pretty good. He looks happy, and you know what? He probably will be getting off that Honda onto the Ducati. It must feel absolutely amazing. And something I was actually quite happy to see was that Digi Antonio seems to be doing a bit better. 7th on the combined times in the end, only 4 tenths off. And apparently he's getting on really well with his new crew chief, Frankie Carcetti. So Ducati overall, all 4 of the teams seem like they're having an absolute amazing time. I think it's going to be hard to beat them. It's going to be hard because there's so many of them and they're all so competitive.
Yeah, if you just kind of look at throughout the 3 days, you look at the top 8, top 10, and it's Ducatis sprinkled with other manufacturers in there. Like would you say the VR46 would be behind at least Pramac, so that's your third tier of team, we could call it, and they're topping 2 out of the 3 days. Just shows how competitive the machine is and how well it's dialed in. The only interesting thing, really, most of the stuff you said there, so the factory team, not really surprised that it's going to take a couple of tests for Bastianini to come into his own new team, coming into the World Champions team. So everything there, like you mentioned, the engine is slightly aggressive on the first crack of the throttle. Some engine mapping throughout the 3 days seemed to just kind of tie that up towards the end of the test, so they came away very happy. Again, now some more aero tricks from GG throughout the week as well. Pramac, really, I feel actually kind of a bit disrespecting towards Zarco. The fact that, now, fair enough, maybe he's the older rider in the team and the whole Ducati fold, and they're probably not going to put VR46's nose out of line by asking his riders to do anything silly. And you probably don't go to Digi, being one of the lesser riders in the team, and of course Alex Marquez is the newest rider in that squad too. So
they have the older bikes as well.
Also a good point of the older bike. So I feel like he's been really restricted this test. Now, will that come to affect him in Portimao when we go racing? Maybe not, but the fact that he didn't get to go and kind of work on himself, and it was more the fact that he actually spent a lot of time doing the donkey's work for the other teams, was a bit of an interesting one. That I feel like maybe this is something that Ducati have learned from last year with Pecco making the factory team do the work. They've kind of pawned everything over to Zarco to be like, well, if his season isn't up to scratch, we're kind of okay with that, really, is the way, from what I could see. I saw a lot of shots of him in the pits and he just didn't seem very happy, or didn't seem to want to be there, for want of a better phrase. But that was the kind of one interesting thing. Of course, the 2 VR46 riders were just rapid. Marini, after topping the final, or the single day in Valencia at the end of last year, and now he's topped the overall fastest laps in Sepang. He's never been someone you go, geez, he's amazing over one lap. He's not a Jorge Martin. He's a much more of a methodical rider that gets it out of a full 28 lap race. He'll get the most out of that. So it's very, very intriguing to see what his opening couple of rounds are going to be like. It's going to be a real interesting few races for him, just to see, can he just kind of take this into season and build upon it, and just see, can he get a result or two out of this, because he's definitely showing some promise. And it's not about time, but he's coming at the right time, because he's there a couple of years now, he's building into it, so everything's just coming nicely to him. But that is Ducati pretty much done and dusted, so they're coming in again heavily favourites. There isn't anything we come in to think about worrying them. The biggest issue for me as a worry is how the factory pairing will get on side by side. I could see them falling out, and it could get very, very fiery between them, and that could be a bad thing for the team overall. But 8 fast riders, that can't be a bad thing. So really, 99% of the test was perfect with them. I just wonder what will happen if Pecco and Bastianini are really close in pace. Will they fall out? Will that really wreck the team, and will it fall apart? Kind of like the Iannone and Dovizioso years, where they didn't get on. They had issues on track, and it probably ruined a good couple of years as well for them there, where they had fast riders. But that is Ducati anyway. From now, we're going to move on now to the Austrian manufacturer of KTM, and we're going to cover Gas, of course, as it is a in-house brand. So KTM, new riders, new team, technically. A lot of work to do coming from the 22 season. Have there anything you've noticed from KTM that's caught your eye over the couple of days in Sepang?
Well, as you say, new riders, new team, but some things do stay the same. A lot of new parts, like so many new parts, apparently, like loads of different aero and all this different stuff. It seems like they're kind of not learning their lesson, because that seems to be their biggest problem over the last few years, is that they're constantly bringing new parts and they don't get a chance to actually properly evaluate them. So I feel like maybe they should have took the approach of less is more, but I'll let them off since it is a pre-season test, so it's a little bit different than in season, but still seems to be a little bit counterintuitive. They don't seem to be a lot better than last year. Honestly, they still seem to be struggling over one lap. Actually, it's worth noting that the fastest rider over one lap was the guy that's been off the bike for 2 years, Paul, jumping on the gas, and we do know that unlike Marini, obviously, like you were saying, Marini's not a one-lap hero. I think Paul Espargaro is probably the biggest one-lap hero on the grid. He can bite the screen, so at least they've got that going for them. They might be able to do a bit better because the bike tended to go pretty well over the race. It is actually hard to kind of gauge the bikes in terms of race pace. Obviously, you can tell what the riders are saying. They're saying, "Oh, the bike feels good over the race." But when you only have the times here, it's the fastest time trial times, sort of the one lap times. So it is tough to tell. But it does seem like they're struggling because Paul is 13th. He's the fastest, and he's 0.9 off Marini. Then Binder's 14th behind him. Miller's down in 18th. And Augusto Fernandez, to be fair, is a rookie, so he's going to be obviously at the back. He's in last place, but of course he's still learning the bike, so I'm not going to be too harsh on him on that. But the three riders there, that obviously are the experienced MotoGP riders, they're all very close, but there's less than it's just over a tenth separating the three of those guys, so they are very close. But it doesn't seem like they're right there, because if you're 0.9 off in Q2 or Q1, probably, if you're not 0.9 off, you're not getting through, and you're starting in the back, and then you've got the sprint race, you're not going to get through there. You might be able to get through in the main race, to be fair. You might get a couple of good results, but if you qualify in a second off every weekend, you are definitely going to struggle. Miller seems to be showing improvements as well. Obviously, he's still trying to learn the bike, but then he seemed to hit a bit of a brick wall with it. So, yeah, not a great preseason for KTM. I know they were testing some different, I don't know if it was different engines or just different sort of engine mapping, because you could hear the two bikes going around sounded different. MotoGP, every day of the test, were doing their sort of midday roundup, and sometimes the bikes were on track, so you could hear them go by in the background, and the two KTM stuff sounded quite different when that happened. But yeah, overall, probably the only positive to take from it is that, yeah, Miller's kind of got up to speed on the bike. He's basically on Binder's pace already, at least one lap wise. Paul at least can pull it out a bit, and he looks pretty happy. And to be fair, Augusto Fernandez didn't crash, just getting on with his work. So fair enough. That's a good way to start his rookie campaign, because the last thing he wants to do is crash in the first test and end up injuring himself.
Yeah, there's one thing you said there now that you said is kind of positive. I think it might be a weakness. We've always saw that KTM's biggest issue was their one lap pace. So you were saying 0.9 off, and just three of them pretty much within a small area between.
Yeah, they're within a tenth, all of them.
Yeah, within a tenth. So if they're all within a tenth of each other, that probably means that they're all getting pretty much as much each other out of the bike. So does that mean still that the KTM doesn't have that one lap pace in it like other bikes do? So are we going to see another season of hearing Miller and Binder saying, well, I was 1.1 off in Q1, I qualified 16th, and I finished 7th because my race pace was as good as Marquez, as good as Pecco, and so on and so forth. So it looks like maybe it's going to be a pretty carbon copy season from last year if things go like this. Now, of course, maybe they didn't push for the ultimate outright, and they were trying maybe some other aspect of their plan was to try and build a different way. But surely even Pit Bowyer and the head of KTMs have come out and said that the whole issue with KTM is that not that they can't do it for 26, 27 laps, it's the fact that they can't be 0.2 off if you carry over one lap when it comes down to low fuel, a soft rear tyre. They can't get the bike just to get that performance out of it. So the fact that maybe already they're showing signs that maybe they haven't fixed that yet is a bit worrying, because in modern day MotoGP you lose so much time being stuck behind slower riders. If it continues this year where Binder's in Q2 6 out of 25 races, whatever we have this year, that's not going to be enough. Throw in your sprint races, it's going to be very difficult for the KTM and Gas boys this year if that is the case. Now we'll learn more when we go to Portimao, a bit more of a normal track, more average temperatures, something a bit more normal about that being a European round, has a bit more kind of correlating data to the other part of the championship. Sepang is always a bit vague, and it doesn't always translate to season performances, but it looks like they seem happy for most of them. Like you did say, Miller hit that brick wall, did have a little tip off in turn 1. He said that he feels like the potential is huge, but is that because is his saying of the potential is huge because he sees so much work being done by KTM to bring in parts so that they're constantly trying to develop the bike, or is it that the current workings of the bike is really working well for them? So it's going to be interesting. Again, we'll learn more as we go to Portimao, and then when we actually go to Portimao for the race. But we'll jump now forward to the first of 2 Japanese manufacturers. Now, probably, arguably, the team with the most to benefit from testing. They need a big step. Honda. What did you make of all their testing? All teams, all riders, a lot of new riders in that team. Did you think that they've made a step, or do you think they are still a bit lost?
Well, they're probably about the most interesting manufacturer to me from what I've seen. It does seem like they're still a bit lost, to be honest, but it's definitely not through lack of trying, because there's so many bikes there that it almost could be a case of the KTM syndrome where there was a bit too much. But Marquez, I think Marquez had did he have about 4 bikes in the end? I know
he started with 4, and then by the end of the third day he was down to 1.
Yeah, he sort of tried them all out and obviously said, "Oh, okay, this one's better," so he'd eliminate them. So he had a lot of things to try. So at least they're throwing everything at it. But it seems like in the end they've kind of gone back to what they kind of had anyway. The bike sort of from Valencia, a little bit upgraded. So they had sort of a radical bike that it did look quite different. The Honda did look a little bit different, some of these different radical bikes. But they've ended up going with the one that's close to the Valencia one, which I guess was close to the current bike. So I guess there's not a massive change there, but that's not always the worst thing. I mean, we've seen that with Ducati in the past. Sometimes these small increments are good enough just to change things. I mean, the GP22 is top at the moment, so older stuff does seem to still work. The most interesting thing I did notice though was that they ran without aero. I think Marquez did it, Bradl did it, and I think Rins. I don't know if Nakagami did, and Mir. I don't think I saw either. I don't think I've seen pictures of those two without wings. They could very well have ran without them, but I didn't see any pictures of it. And it's very interesting. I think it's to do with actually just figuring out how the base bike works, but it just looks really nice. That's what I noticed. It was nice to see the bikes without the wings on, I must say, and they do look better. So get rid of them all. But yeah, that was probably the most interesting part of their test overall. Neither of them seemed particularly fast or positive. Marquez is a 10th on the timing sheets, 7/10 off. Mir is actually only about a 10th behind him, so that's actually quite positive for Mir, to be fair. He's somewhat near Marquez, which is obviously great to see, because usually the teammates are absolutely nowhere near him. Nakagami, I think he's still injured, so he's still struggling. So the hand injury picked up. Really nasty injury. It was the one from the Aragon crash, I assume, that they're still being played with, and it was a nasty little crash, wasn't it? The whole thing with Marquez, and seems to still be given in trouble, which is quite concerning, considering how it was obviously quite a while ago, and I think he's had the surgery on it. And I know he raced the Japanese Grand Prix when he really shouldn't have done, just to be there, and maybe he's done some more damage to his hand there. So I'm hoping that Nakagami can kind of recover, but that's not great that he's still struggling, because him on this timing sheet here, again, I don't know whether he didn't do a time trial run, like a proper one-lap run, but he's miles off. He's only just in front of Augusto Fernandez. He's the only guy that's really anywhere near Augusto Fernandez, to be fair, and he's a rookie, so that's not ideal for Nakagami. And Rins, I couldn't see anything about Rins, really, which probably speaks for itself. If he's not coming out saying lots of positive things, then maybe it's not so positive. But also, equally, if he's not throwing his helmet around the box, then I suppose that's also a positive sign. So not really sure where Rins is at. I think he's going to be in for a tough year just based on his riding style compared to the Honda, but I guess we'll find out. But overall, doesn't seem to be much improvement for there. They even tried without the aero, but it doesn't seem to be any better, really.
Yeah, no, I'm going to start with Nakagami, because you touched on his injury. From what I've read and from what I've been hearing, he did a lot of damage riding in Motegi to ride his home race. No way in hell should he have been at the track, never mind on a bike. They were saying his hand was that bad, so it looks like bad injury, made a lot worse, and now the recovery time is worse. So it looks like he's kind of put himself in that position just to ride his home race. Now, it's a rider's decision, of course, but he seems very severe. Like, I've seen pictures of his hands, and they're in a bad way at the moment. And I definitely think that is...
Stop them. They need to have someone in place to stop them doing stuff like that.
Yeah,
the rider's always going to try and ride.
It's, a Japanese rider, and at that time as well, I could be wrong, but I don't think he was confirmed for 23. So that could have been his last GP race at his home race. So he was, he would have no legs and still try to race that that Grand Prix. It was, there wasn't going to be much stopping Taka that weekend, to be fair. But he's definitely done a lot more damage to himself, and it's a shame because Honda again are in such a delicate moment where they need all the most accurate and up to speed data, and he's riding with one hand basically behind his back because he can't use it. So as someone, again, you need to look at Honda as 2 new riders and 2 riders that have been there. Now 2 riders that have been there are still kind of getting over in, well, my eyes, Mark is 90%, judging by his own comments, that he's pretty much back to where he can be. And of course, Nakagami doesn't seem to have the strength in the hand. So there's a lot of knowledge from Nakagami and from Mark that mightn't be at the level they need it yet. So it's going to be hard for Honda, because the fact they started out with 4 bikes for Mark is they took the aero off one. Ken Carucci, who's the new lead development of Honda, he came over from Suzuki after they pulled out. His philosophy, from what Marcus has said, is that he takes 1 step back to make 2 forward. So he's not coming in trying to already put his ideas on. He wants as much information as he can get from his 4 riders to take that kind of and then build upon that, which is quite worrying if you think that most of the time you see them going to Valencia at the end of the season with a slightly tweaked bike going into the pre-season of February, that kind of area there. They already have the idea. So if he's only coming in after November time from Suzuki, then going to Honda, and then it's his first proper test is Sepang, and now he's taking all that development and all that data back to work on a bike. Honda could get it really badly wrong for the start of the season and really ruin the season if they go down the wrong path. Now, from what I've read from Marcus, biggest issue with the bike at the moment, they started with the 4 of them. A lot of them just weren't right. He said the potential isn't there on the bikes. Big issue for him at the moment, he said the bike has very good top speed. The issue is I can't get to that top speed as fast as other machinery. So he says when we go back to the European rounds, a track like Jerez, where you don't have long straights, he's going to get penalised more there, and he said he's going to be more on the limit to try and make overtakes and just for racing in general. So issues like that are big for Mark at the moment, because with the Honda probably not being that brilliant bike that can do 1 lap, he needs to be there in the races, and if he can't overtake because he can't get alongside the Ducati, it's not really much good having the top end speed if you lose 2/10 by the time you get there. So that's his big issue at the moment, as well as just overall rideability of the bike. Now, Mir has been very quiet. He said that the bike is okay. He said it's better than he expected. 1 lap pace is his biggest issue. He said it's not really feasible to extract the pace out like you'd expect. So a lot of different issues for the Honda. Marcus has nailed down 1 aero already and 1 bike to develop. He's given all the data, and he's hoping that come Portimao they'll have some more bits to bolt on. His big issue and his biggest statement really of the weekend was this: I've picked the bike for this season, but this bike still isn't enough to get me to the championship. So he knows himself, and Honda know that they're not there yet. So a bit of work to do yet for Honda. They have a big few weeks coming up now between now and Portimao test. So really, Mir and Rins being new riders, they're probably not going to do massive amounts of development. Just for them, it's probably going to leave it to Mark and Nakagami and just try and learn the bike as best they can. I do believe Mir will do a lot better than Rins just because of his style, like you mentioned. But yeah, Honda, I really like the way they brought in Ken, and they've stripped back, even taken off the aero just to see what the base, chassis, bike, swing arm works, get an understanding of the bike, and then build it back up. I really like that kind of philosophy, and I must say it was really cool seeing Marquez on track. There's a picture of him coming into the final corner, and it's a bit sideways, his leg is off, the bike is in the air. It just looks right, looks better than all the aero we have at the moment. But unfortunately, it's here to stay for now. And unless we get some more of these one-off test days where they strip the aero back, we probably won't see more pictures like that anytime soon. But I think we've covered Honda enough. It is time now to go to the other Japanese manufacturer. Probably equally as a worrying position for them, Yamaha. Now, Yamaha's test day one started off quite well. Frankie was very happy with the chassis and was impressed by the engine. Similarly, Quartararo's engine felt quite good. He was happy. But as the test days went on, they started to get a bit more worried, and so did Yamaha. So what have you made of the 3 days for Yamaha? How they started so well and slightly went off the boil by day 3?
Yeah, very strange, really. Because if you go back to Valencia, it was like, what's happened here? This new engine they've brought hasn't worked. We still haven't fully found out why that was, but it seems to have been a fluke or an issue with a specific engine or specific settings they were using at that time, whether the electronics weren't dialed in correctly or whatever. That does seem to be the outlier rather than the rule. So all the tests that they've done with Cal where it's worked, the testing in the shakedown here, it's worked at the actual test here. So I think it's safe to say that the engine actually is a big step forward, it seems. I couldn't find the speed trap times to compare to, speed trap speeds to compare from last year to this year. I don't know if you have any of those to hand, but it was like a decent improvement. The stuff I did see in terms of the speeds, they were up there with the Ducatis. Like, they weren't as fast as them, of course, and I'm sure the Ducatis aren't running full power yet. I'm sure GG is a bit too smart to do that. But it was much better, and to be honest, that's all they need. They just need to be able to stick with the Ducati. If you can stay in the Ducati slipstream, you can actually keep up with them then, whereas they couldn't even stay in the slipstream before. And if you can slipstream a bike, just stay with it. You're then close enough by the time you get to the corner to try and pull a pass. You don't have to actually pass them on the straight. You don't have to level them on the straight. You just have to be within range to actually be able to pull a pass, whereas at the point before, they weren't, especially if you looked at tracks like Qatar, for example. Interestingly, I saw a video earlier of it was a few different clips of Ducatis blasting past people on the straights, blasting two Pramacs blasting past Fabio, when Bagnaia and Zarco flew past Mir on the final lap of the 2021 race. So yeah, I guess we probably won't be seeing that as much anymore with the slight speed increase. Probably still will see it, let's be honest, but maybe not quite as easily. But then their issue really was the one lap pace. So the engine, big improvement, seems to be great. Even when they were doing the one lap sort of time attacks, Fabio was pretty happy with it. He didn't feel like there was much of an issue. But then when they get back to the pits, they look at the lap times. They are down in 17th and 20th on these one lap runs. They're both a second off. Now, I actually will say that for Morbidelli, it must be quite good because he's actually very close to Quartararo. And race pace wise, last year he wasn't too far off him anyway, but qualifying pace where he was losing all this time, starting in Q1, starting at the back all the time, he's less than a tenth off Quartararo, so he's got to be quite happy with that, actually, to be fair. So Morbidelli probably is quite chuffed with that improvement, but at the same time is going to be disappointed. But I think it's probably good for him because this could really define his career. If he doesn't have a good year this year, his career could be completely over, to be honest. So definitely does need to try and step it up. But it just seems so bizarre that they're off the one lap pace. I mean, remember a few years ago, back to 2019, where it was the king of the one lap pace, that bike. It was so good. They could just carry the corner speed so much. And it was always the fact that, like, those sort of years, 17, 18, 19, the Yamaha would qualify really well. You get Rossi putting it on pole, Vinales putting it on pole, Fabio putting it on pole, Morbidelli putting it on pole. And then in the race, they'd get overtaken by the Ducatis on the straight because they could make up for the straight line deficit around the corners on one lap. But then in the race, they couldn't. But now it just seems like they can't. And I think that's probably down to the fact that the other bikes now turn so close in speed to the Yamaha. The Yamaha doesn't have that advantage over one lap that it once did. So I think it's going to be tough. It's still going to be hard. To be honest, obviously qualifying is very important. Obviously, like we were saying with KTM, but at least the engine is better. It's going to help them out in the races, and at the end of the day, that is where you score the points. So maybe if you can try and get a toe in qualifying, maybe it's, if you just try to improve the one lap a little bit, then they can actually make passes in the races, and they're talking a bit. But yeah, it's just strange, just so strange. Improve in one area, lose that in another. Although, to be fair, they were struggling in one lap anyway. Fabio hasn't had a pole for such a long time, and he's probably the best one lap rider out there. So yeah, very strange for Yamaha.
Yeah, it's a bit disheartening because Valencia, well, you go back to the Jerez test when they tried the engine for the first time, they were all ranting. Oh, sorry, that wasn't her, it was Mazzano. My apologies. Mazzano, they tried it and they were up 3 or 4 kilometers into speed trap. I can't find the exact figures from last year in Sepang, but from what I've seen from other reports, is they're about 6 kilometers quicker, or they've kind of halved the deficit between, which is a huge amount. Now, whether that's, you see, with Sepang, the issue with Sepang and the speed trap is it's in the braking zone. It's basically a Formula 1 speed trap. So you're already on the brakes for this one, and it can be deceived and skewed, because if you basically take the piss on the brakes and just brake a meter or two too late and blow the corner, you're still going to put up his top speed that's quicker than most. So you could see Ducati doing a consistent top speed, and you could see Yamaha doing it once every 7 laps where they go slightly a touch deep, go for the late apex. That doesn't mean they're any closer. That just means that they've tried something different in that lap. So hopefully it is better. Now, from the riders' feedback, they've both said it's more aggressive, it takes a bit more riding, and then in the lower gears it's more of a handful, so it'll take a different riding style, but they are more happy that it seems to give more power. Now, the riders themselves and the team will know that they've been on track for 3 days. They're bound to have been behind an Aprilia or a Ducati or a Honda, and they'll know themselves that sinking feeling of a bike pulling away the whole way down the straight. If they're that happy, I'd imagine they've had a few runs where they've been behind other people and they've seen the kind of actual mechanical side of it, if they actually are losing that much time, and then that could be where their positivity is coming. But the fact that, like you mentioned, Fabio said, my pace when the tyre goes down is very good. He's very happy, but when I stick in a new tyre, it makes no difference. It's something it's actually very common in the last 3 or 4 years, just with many manufacturers. It's been a KTM issue. It was a Suzuki issue before they won the title in 20. So I wonder, is it the fact that a softer qualifying style tyre, obviously it's not a qualifying tyre, it's just a softer tyre, does the aero, the ride height devices, and all these kind of extra bits, do they just get the most out of the tyre for so much of the lap anyway, that when you stick in a softer one you don't get that gain, and that's why you don't see these massive lumps of time gained in qualifying? I reckon maybe that's a part of it, because it's not like one manufacturer struggle with it. It looks like they've all, maybe bar Ducati and Aprilia, they've all seemed to struggle with this over the last 2 or 3 seasons, where the aero and these ride height devices have been very prominent. So for Fabio, it is incredibly worrying, because he says things like 80% of the race weekend is qualifying, and you can't really argue with him. When he qualifies low, he doesn't really do much of a weekend, and that's not for wanted trying or for lack of race pace. It just usually means that he gets stuck in the pack. And we haven't even touched yet on the fact that there's sprint races next year, or this year, next season I should say, coming, and the fact that there will be the new front tire pressure monitoring system. So everything's going to get a bit more tough to overtake. Now, they have taken away the front ride height launch kind of what would you call them, the launch devices, so they won't be as stable everywhere, so maybe the racing will get better. But I wonder, has Yamaha finally given their riders what they want, but also given them what they didn't want, in fact, of making the bike slightly overall less competitive? Now, we'll only find out really probably in the first race, I won't even say the sprint race, because the sprint race for everyone in round 1 is going to be so unbelievably, like, it'll just be for data gathering. Nobody will know what to do, nobody will know what to expect, everyone will feel like they have a chance. So the first full 25 lappers where we'll know really where the Yamaha is, and that's probably a bit of a worry even for the Yamaha boys, because they probably wanted to see top 8, top 6 is this, and the fact they're 17th and 20th, and they have their top speed bonus on top of that already. So it's a bit worrying. I'm not going to lie, if you're a Yamaha fan, it's not looking especially good going into this season. But we have covered all of the manufacturers. Rhys, have you any final words on testing and what you've noticed throughout the week?
It's just been great to see the bikes back on track, hasn't it, really? It's been so long. Obviously, the last kind of action we saw was the end of November in the Valencia test. Then, yeah, you see the odd clip of, Cal on a bike somewhere or Bradl on a bike somewhere. But just to see some actual footage, have some actual MotoGP content as well, all the sort of after the flag shows, all the sort of mid-race roundups, the videos they put on the YouTube or the different socials. It's just great to see that. That's probably my biggest takeaway from the test. But overall, I guess it's just the Ducati again just looks unstoppable, and it's strange. It's also strange to see that Yamaha actually finally brought the engine increase, because they've been trying to do that for about 20 years. So it's interesting to see they've finally done it. But yeah, it's going to be hard to see past Ducati. I think maybe Aprilia could take it to him. If Viñales turns up on a day where he's feeling good, I think he could probably challenge them. Obviously, Aleix, he was pretty consistent all through last year, but to be fair, was never really outright the fastest guy. He was always sort of slightly off, so maybe he'll be able to do it on the right circumstances as well. But, that's what we're looking at. We're looking at it needs to be the right circumstances. Now, it could very well be Ducati's 1-8 starting the sprint race and finishing the sprint race in Portimao when we get there in a few weeks' time. Now, again, that also might skew things a little bit with it being Portimao. You might see Yamaha turn up a bit more there with the corner speed. But, yeah, just great to see the bikes back, really, and the Ducati just looks unstoppable once again.
Yeah, I unfortunately agree with everything. It is looking like the Bologna bullets have really... For a couple of years now, they've done it. Like, you go back to Stoner, you go back basically when they first came into the class. They had years where they'd nail it and then they'd go backwards, nail it, go backwards. And then they had a Stoner era where they had a god on the bike and he was making the difference.
Fight with a really good guy on it.
And then Stoner went to Honda. They put the next best thing on it, which was another god, and that god fell from the sky, crashed every weekend, and they were like, oh Jesus, the bike is terrible. Then they brought in Gigi, and then slowly but surely he's showed them how to make a motorcycle and not just an engine. And now they've finally got here. And remember, Dorn have put a lot of things in Ducati's way. They've taken... they tried to get rid of the wings. They told them that they have to be enclosed. So now we have these aero fairings. They've tried so many times to get rid of different things. The tires. They're just... A lot of things have been put in Ducati's way and they've still managed to get to the top. So... A long time we're going to be looking at these Ducatis at the front. I don't think they're going anywhere soon. Not unless we get some regulation change. But to be honest, with the Audi money behind them, Gigi Dell'Igna and his crew in there, they are the modern day superpower in MotoGP, and you're kind of thinking that if you want to be a champion in the next 5 or 6 years, you're probably looking at that red factory Ducati seat as your big money ticket. For a couple of years it was the Honda of Repsol. That was the big seat. Then it was the Yamahas of the Rossi days, and it's now predominantly going to be, if you want to be on the best bike, you're going to be on that Ducati. And every other bike has so much weaknesses compared to the Ducati, that the fact that Ducati's gotten better again, they've so many riders on track. I can't really honestly think of a big issue with that Ducati. It stops, it turns, probably not as well as most bikes, but it turns enough. You stick Pecco on it, who is kind of a Lorenzo-esque style. You have Zarco on, who again has very nice corner style. Marini or Jorge Martin, who is just an ultra extreme riding style. He gets ridiculous lean angles and just gets the bike to turn. Marini, who is very, very solid rider. Bezzecchi is another one of those outright amazing style riders. So they have so many unique talents on the bike. They have the bike dialed in so well. It's going to be... They're going to be everybody's tip for the season, but I think we're going to end it there on that. So Ducati have wiped the floor with everyone again in testing, and if you're any other manufacturer going into the 23 season, you're going to be playing catch up not only to your manufacturers around you, but that big red Ducati in front of you is not going to be easy to get out of the way. I hope you have enjoyed joining us today for our pre-season roundup, and we shall catch you in the coming weeks with another podcast. Thanks for tuning in. See you soon.